report to you that we made our goal. You did it. You stepped up. You got us through the weekend, and we are rocking and pushing forward into this week and this month and this year. There is a lot more to do. It is only the beginning, and the finances will have to keep working through it. But you stepped up. You made a difference, and I want you to know how good that should make you feel. I also think there's a huge energy shift because of that, because there is a case that we've been trying to work out with the CDC now for many, many months. It was getting very contentious over the last few weeks. And then last Thursday, when I said, please support us in our work, we are the most successful nonprofit that has ever begun suing around vaccines. Before we came on board, everyone said you couldn't sue. There's nothing you can do. It's impenetrable. But then we found a way, and we have been achieving. Well, Thursday, you all stepped up. Friday, you started helping us, and many of you were signing up to our $20 for 2020 so that you can be a part of a recurring donation that makes a difference in this world. Well, I don't know if it's just energetic. I don't know if somehow cosmically we shifted the energy in time and space. But on Friday, we finally got the signatures from the CDC, and we have just settled and won another case. I'm going to talk about this case, but first, I want to talk about autism. I want to talk about the fact that we keep hearing that there's no proof that vaccines cause autism. Tons and tons of studies have been done ad nauseum. It sounds something like this on every television in the world.
Vaccines have nothing to do with autism.
Vaccines do not cause autism.
Vaccines don't cause autism. The science is clear.
We have thoroughly debunked any association between autism and these vaccines.
It has been looked at exhaustively.
Massive evidence that there's no link between vaccines and autism.
To believe the science, it clearly has exonerated vaccines.
Robert, it is nearly consensus in the scientific community that there's no link there.
We're not sure as a scientific community what causes autism, but we know that vaccines do not.
There have been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of children that have been looked at and studied to see whether or not that risk exists. And there really has been shown no link.
A mountain of scientific evidence, which has already taught us that the combination measles, mumps, rubella, or MMR vaccine doesn't cause autism. Thimerosal, an ethyl mercury containing preservative that was in a number of vaccines, doesn't cause autism. And that most recently, that too many vaccines given too soon, if you will, doesn't also cause autism. So we know that the schedule is safe.
Because I'm a doctor, because I've been trained in immunology and I'm trained in the scientific method, I could go through and sort through the garbage and get to the truth. And some of it is going to make sure I know credible sources, understanding the methodology, and I was able to answer the question, which is no, they've shown it's not the case.
Are there peer-reviewed scientific reports that indicate a link between vaccines and autism?
No. And not only is there not peer-reviewed work, this is probably the most studied public health issue involving children.
Vaccines are really the one thing we have looked at as causing autism.
The Institutes of Medicine, the Centers for Disease Control have repeatedly investigated this. Vaccines do not cause autism.
Ranging in the numbers of millions of children that they've actually looked at when you combine all of the studies together.
Okay. Hundreds of thousands of children.
Studies of 1 million children that there's no link between vaccines and autism.
The misinformation that vaccines cause autism, we've had so many robust studies debunking that.
The science around a purported link between these vaccines and autism was thoroughly debunked years ago, and there's been many subsequent studies of equal magnitude.
There comes a point where there's so much evidence, none of which shows any link between vaccines and autism, that you have to say, enough.
Yeah, that's right.
We don't need more research. At some point, enough is enough. It's fine to continue to collect data, but at some point, you have to take no for an answer.
If you're one of those people that watch our show that watched your child regress into autism after a vaccination, or probably watched them get very sick after a first round of vaccinations, asked your doctor about it, they said, it's just a coincidence, that's normal, and so you did it again and they got worse, and maybe you did the whole schedule each time they got worse until you lost them completely. I can't imagine how difficult it is to watch those people say those things on television. I want to say this, that, you know, over the last year especially, there's been a lot of people that pull me aside because I travel all over the country and, you know, I speak before panels, Senate panels and congressional panels, and they'll say to me, Del, drop autism, like let go of autism, because, you know, we have so much science now, the aluminum science and all these other issues on autoimmune disease. You know we got asthma. We know that, you know, all of the Crohn's disease and multiple sclerosis. There's so many things you can talk about now, and they basically just made this autism a bad buzzword, and it's getting in our way. Well, I want to let you know that I can see people that probably don't have autistic children at home thinking that they're dealt with asthma or they have the other issues. But I'm not like anyone else. I'm one of the few people, me, Polly Tommy, maybe Andy Wakefield, a few others, that have been in the homes of thousands of people with autism, or if not in their homes, having them share their stories with us in front of cameras. I've traveled the country and parts of the world to hear these stories everywhere I go. I've seen how difficult this life is. I can only imagine how tragic it must be to lose a perfectly healthy child that on one day was saying, I love you, Mommy, I love you, Daddy, and then you went to your doctor, they injected with a vaccine, you were doing what you were told to do, you were doing what you thought you had done as a child. You weren't aware that the vaccine program had exploded from 11 vaccines to 54, perhaps. But then your child was never the same again. Some of them self-injuring, beating on themselves, hurting themselves. You're trying to protect them from themselves. I want you to know that I will never stop talking about autism. I will never stop talking about an issue that has gone from 1 in 10,000 to essentially now 1 in 36 based on polls from the CDC. This thing potentially could end our species. It certainly is going to make it so expensive that we cannot move forward with anything else we want to do in this world. And so that's why the Informed Consent Action Network did not leave autism alone. Instead, we sued. Let me explain how this lawsuit works. Now, we are hearing more and more that you can, diagnose, we can start seeing the signs of autism within the first 6 months. In fact, this is right from Autism Speaks, a group that refuses to accept that vaccines could be a part of this. They, by the way, raise millions, tens of millions of dollars every year to avoid doing the proper science. But this is what they say. By 6 months, you can see few or no big smiles or other warm, joyful, and engaging expressions, limited or no eye contact. Then they go on to 9 months, but these are the milestones we can see. So it's clear that autism, we're now recognizing, may not just start at 18 months. It perhaps is all those vaccines early, all of those well baby visits, 2 months, 4 months, 6 months. So because of this, and we decided, well, what's in those vaccines? And specifically, if you go, now remember, if you go in for your well baby visits for those first 6 months, you're going to be told, you're going to be handed a VIS sheet. And on the VIS sheet, it says, there's going to be some sensitivity around the site. There might be a little bit of fever. There could be some crankiness, but that's about it. Vaccines have been proven to be extremely safe. And if you have any more questions, it kind of says on the bottom sheet, if you have any more questions, then just go to our website, the CDC. Well, if you go there, this is what it says. This is the bottom of that VIS sheet, right? Then you go to the website, and what do you see when you're on that website? You see this page. It says, vaccines do not cause autism. There is no link between vaccines and autism. This is really important for them to tell you. Vaccines do not cause autism. Now, I've talked about this a lot before, and many of you probably know exactly where I'm going. But this is why the work we're doing at ICANN is so important. It's one thing to say it. It's one thing to point out the discrepancies, and it's a whole other thing to get a court-ordered stipulation with the sides representing the CDC, the sides representing ICANN, and a judge signing on to it. So what have they signed on to? Here's what we did. We said, okay, if you're so confident that vaccines don't cause autism, and all of you are getting on the television to say, oh, let's listen to these. We've exhaustively researched it. This is the most studied public health issue there is. Millions of children have been investigated. This is the one thing we have investigated when it comes to autism, is vaccines. We need to take our money away from that investigation and look at other possibilities. We have thoroughly debunked the question of whether or not vaccines cause autism. We've debunked it. Really? Okay, great. So here's what we said. Since it appears that we're giving these childhood vaccines, the first 6 vaccines being hepatitis B, Hib, Prevnar, DTaP, and polio, we give it over and over and over again in multiple doses over the first 6 months. And since you said you have done studies on all vaccines, there it is. There's the, you can see right there in the first 6 months, we've got, I think it's at least 15 doses of vaccines we're giving our children, okay? So we said, great. We would like, we put forward a request, first of all, in a FOIA request. We would simply just like to see the studies that show that vaccines don't cause autism. Let's be more specific. We said we'd like to see all studies relied upon by CDC to claim that the DTaP vaccine does not cause autism. All studies relied upon by the CDC to claim that neither Engerix-B or Recombivac's HB do not cause autism. All studies relied upon by the CDC to claim that Prevnar 13 does not cause autism. All studies relied upon by CDC to claim that Hib vaccines do not cause autism. All studies relied upon by the CDC to claim that inactivated polio vaccines, IPV, does not cause autism. And then we'd like copies of the studies the CDC relies upon to claim that the cumulative exposure of vaccines it recommends that babies be administered during the first 6 months of life do not cause autism. I mean, geez, you got Paul Offit out there saying we got mountains and mountains of these studies. They're everywhere. We've exhaustively looked at it. This should have been easy. But guess what? They didn't really respond for a while. We pressed them. And then they gave us a link to their website. We said, no. You're not going to get away with that. This is a FOIA request. This is a request for documents. You're not going to tell us what you think or your opinion and send us on some wild goose chase. We're tired of that wild goose chase. We're tired of being run around. No, we want you to provide us with this supposed mountain of evidence that you have that these vaccines we're giving our children in the first 6 months do not cause autism, as you say. Well, guess what? They didn't want to do it. This has actually been the case for all of our lawsuits. They just start out as FOIA requests, but the CDC doesn't want to adhere to the law. They don't want to provide the studies, which makes you start wondering why. Why don't they want to provide those studies? Well, we took them to federal court. And on Friday, as I said, we won the case. They are not allowed to avoid telling us what studies. In fact, they decided instead, or they had to, give us the list. So here it is, folks. Here's what it looks like in the document. They gave us the list. It's actually 20 studies. 20 total studies make up the entire list of what they look to when they say that these childhood vaccines, the 5 and the cumulative effects of them given in the first 6 months of life, 20 studies is why we're confident to say they don't cause autism. Now remember, they said mountains. But this is what they gave us. These are 20 Jenga pieces. This is not a mountain. This is a molehill. This is an embarrassment. I don't know how all those pundits are on TV screaming and yelling about the amount of studies being done, but when we finally asked for them, they came back with 20. Remember, they could have given us every study in the world that made their point. This is all they actually had when they did their search. So how about we do this to those studies? Let me take you through this a little bit. Let's go to the big screen here. 20 studies. Here they are. Here are the 20 studies they provided. Now remember, we're asking, I'm looking there, sorry. We're asking questions about DTaP, Hib, Hep B, Prevnar, and polio, okay? So we should be seeing studies, I'm assuming, on DTaP, Hib, Hep B, Prevnar, and polio, right? Wrong. Here's what we have in these 20 studies. The first one, that's an MMR study, okay? The second one, an MMR and a DTaP study. The next one's MMR, these four are MMR and thimerosal studies. For those of you who don't know what thimerosal is, that's the mercury-containing preservative that used to be in vaccines. A lot of parents thought that caused their child's autism. Well, they eventually took that out of all the childhood vaccines. At least they say they did. I know some of you out there will say, Del, they still rinse it and they clean the vaccines with thimerosal. There's a trace amount. But let's just say, for the most part, thimerosal has been taken out of your childhood vaccines, except for the flu shot, by the way. Multi-dose flu shots still have mercury in them. But again, we have MMR and thimerosal studies. And then the next, all the way through to 20, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, from 7 to 20, are all just thimerosal studies. And lastly, we have one antigen study. Okay? Now, let me be clear. I'm saying studies, and I could be corrected by some of the pundits out there. So let's be really clear. These aren't even 20 studies. There are also reviews. Of the 20 studies, I believe it's the second, third, fourth, and sixth of these studies are reviews of other studies. Reviews essentially of what? MMR and thimerosal studies. Okay? Now let's go back to the big list. Can we bring back the 20, the list of 20? Here we go. All right. So now when we're looking at all 20, we know that, a handful of these are reviews. But how many of these would actually answer the question to DTaP, Hib, Hep B, Prevnar, polio? Well, I'm going to be really honest with you here. Obviously, they've totally missed the boat. But if there was any chance they're going to give us some answers, they do mention the DTaP vaccine in this review, in number 2, and in number 20 down here when we talk about the antigen study. So why don't we talk about the antigen study? Let's just see, is there any potential that this gave them the answer to say that vaccines do not cause autism? Let's take it back here and get to my computer. So essentially, the antigen study was a study we've seen many times before in how they do vaccines. The antigen study worked like this. Essentially, they took children who got a bunch of vaccines and compared them to other children who got a lot of vaccines too. But they tried to see, did the antigen levels, raise or lower the amount of autism? Now, really, when you read this antigen study, what you come to as a conclusion yourself is, really, it was kind of a look at the DTP vaccine. There is increasing exposure to antibody-stimulating proteins and polysaccharides in vaccines is not associated with risk of autism. Frank DiStefano, who is also the lead on the famous CDC study. Oh, by the way, wait. I have to do it. Can we go back here really quick? I missed a beat, and this is really, really important. Here we go. Can we bring that back up? Can we see all the studies? Bring me back to 20, because I think this is awesome. I'm driving my team nuts right now. I told you I would. Okay. So, and how many, bring up where it says the MMR, how many are MMR studies? You're going to love this. So of all these 20 studies, right, this is what they provided for us. And we've got this one's an MMR, and then one is an MMR and DTaP, and then the rest are, then you have MMR and thimerosal, okay? So these group right here, all of these right here, all of these studies, you know what study's not in here? This is what I want to say. You know what study is not in here? It's Frank DiStefano's or Dr. William Thompson's study, the 2004 autism study on MMR. That is the central point of the film Vaxxed, which got me into this whole mess to begin with. They don't even have it in here. Obviously, we've done so much damage with Vaxxed, they said, screw it. Don't even put it in there. I'm pretty sure they know I'm behind this request, and I can, so they just said, forget it. We're not even going to stand by the Frank DiStefano autism MMR study, which is incredible. Sorry, I mean, it may be a little anticlimactic to go back, but I had to do it. I have to do it. You got to claim some victory there. You put out a documentary. That was the seminal study. That was the one they said, this one definitively proves that the MMR doesn't cause autism. And now they don't even put it in the list. I hope you're hearing that, Dr. William Thompson, if you're out there watching. They don't even consider that study worth mentioning anymore. Okay, let's get back to this antigen study. So essentially, when you look at the study, you have to remember that the DTP vaccine, that's the older version of the DTaP vaccine, the diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, that had over 3,000 antigens in it. To give you some perspective, your average vaccines right now have, 5, at most 10 antigens. And so what they really did was sort of compare groups of children that got all the vaccines with a DTaP vaccine, and then groups of children that got all their vaccines plus the DTP vaccine, and their conclusion was whether kids got thousands of antigens or just hundreds of antigens, there was no difference in the amount of autism that they had. Therefore, antigens do not cause autism. Now, I'd like to chalk this up to my Jack Daniels does not intoxicate you argument. Here's how I do the study. We looked at we looked at people that got 10 shots of vodka, and then we looked at people that got 10 shots of vodka plus a shot of Jack Daniels. And when we compared them, both groups staggered, both had difficulty driving, and most had the same amount of percentage of slurred words. Therefore, since Jack Daniels made no difference to the equation, Jack Daniels does not cause intoxication. You see how that works? Bunch of antigens, more antigens, but lots of antigens, lots of vaccines. See, it doesn't cause autism. Now, you may be saying, Del, that's really oversimplifying it, but the truth is you should look at their own conclusion. This is DeStefano's own conclusion in his own study. Can we take a look at this? Here it is. It can be argued that ASD with regression, in which children usually lose developmental skills during the second year of life, could be related to exposures in infancy, including vaccines. However, we found no association between exposure to antigens from vaccines during infancy and the development of ASD with regression. So he admits it right there. All we can tell you is whether you get thousands of antigens or hundreds of antigens, there appears to be no difference. It is a totally useless study. It happens to be where Sanjay Gupta goes when he says there's less antigens than ever before. Vaccines are therefore safer. No, you can't even make that statement because you just proved the antigens aren't the problem. In fact, no one in the movement, no one that is skeptical of vaccines has really ever been complaining about the amount of antigens. It's always about the adjuvant. It's always about the amount of vaccines and all of the other toxic chemicals. So we can wipe that one off. Number 20 is off the list, okay? It did not address DTaP, polio, Hep B, Hib, Prevnar 13. It does not answer the question. Therefore, that study cannot be used to say that vaccines do not cause autism.